Hello, welcome back to the On Duties podcast, a production of the Ciceronian Society. We are reading through Cicero's classic work, On Duties, chapter by chapter, every Wednesday throughout 2026. We hope you'll subscribe to this channel or follow this podcast if you are interested. If you're just hearing us for the first time, you might like to go back and begin with episode 1. This is episode 12. We are partway through book 1 of On Duties, ready to begin Cicero's discussion of greatness of spirit. I'm Chris Anadale. I teach philosophy at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland. I also have a small YouTube channel where I post philosophy videos. I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Ethan and Ben. Would you care to introduce yourself, gentlemen? Ethan?
Yes, my name is Ethan Alexander-Davey. I teach political theory and constitutional law at Campbell University in Buies Creek, North Carolina. And one of my courses is on ancient political thought, and Cicero makes an appearance in that course.
Well, thank you, Chris, for the invitation to be here. I'm grateful to be here. I teach political science at Abilene Christian University, and I teach American politics, political theory, research methods courses. I teach an ancient political theory course where we read The Republic and the Laws by Cicero, and so I'm excited to dive into On Duties.
Great. Well, we have just finished up with chapter 60 in a previous episode. So why don't we begin today, Ethan? Let's have you read chapter 61, and Ben, I'll give you first comment on that. Let's go ahead. We are on page 25 of the Cambridge edition of Cicero's On Duties.
We have laid it down that the source of what is honorable and dutiful is of 4 kinds, but we must realize it is that which is done with a great and lofty spirit, one disdaining human affairs, which appears in the most brilliant light. For that reason, words such as these are so readily available as an insult. You, young men, show a womanly spirit, that maiden a man's. Or these, son of Salamis, neither sweat nor sacrifice secured you your spoils. When, however, it is a matter of praising, it is deeds done with a great spirit, courageously, outstandingly, which seem for some reason to wrest from us fulsome praise. Hence, Marathon, Salamis, Plataea, Thermopylae, Leuctra have become battlefields for orators. Hence also our own Horatius Cocles, the Deci or Deci, Cneius and Publius Scipio, Marcus Marcellus, and countless others. And above all, the Roman people itself are notable for their greatness of spirit. The very fact that the statues we look upon are usually in military dress bears witness to our devotion to military glory.
Well, this is a very interesting, I think just to maybe remember, he mentions the 4 kinds of sources of our duties, right? And so there's the search for truth. Then there are the duties that relate to the bonds of human fellowship, so justice and liberality. And now we're coming to greatness of spirit. And I believe the next is sort of temperance or self-control. But this is an interesting one because immediately you get a little bit of a clue, I think, with where Cicero is going, because he says this one shines the most brightly, right? It has the most brilliant light. And so there's something very sort of attractive about military glory as one kind of potent example of what he's talking about. But this loftiness, greatness of spirit. The phrase that's really interesting to me is the one where he follows in his immediate description, his initial description is, it's a spirit that disdains human affairs. So on the one hand, it seems utterly connected with like the most human of affairs, right? Military glory, achievement, clear victory, right? And at the same time, it's a spirit that disdains human affairs too. So I think it's a really interesting, brilliant, but also detached, but also courageous. There's an interesting thing going on here.
Yeah, I remember talking with Josh Bowman in an early episode about this idea of disdain or contempt for what is human or what is merely human. And I wondered, my own thinking was that perhaps the way in which the military hero, right, Thermopylae and other battles are mentioned, shows greatness of spirit is that he's willing to die. He's willing to say, my life itself is nothing compared to the greatness of the deeds that I will do. And we'll look at that kind of activity, an action that's activated by that kind of attitude towards one's life and everything in it, and we'll say, wow, what a mensch, right? That's a man who is most excellent, who is curious to hear him say here, for some reason, this wins from us the highest praise. Well, it does because it's the most dramatic, it's the most excellent, it's the most stand up and cheer, right? It sort of speaks to the spirit in the observer who wants to praise it all the more highly. We would think the same deed done without greatness of spirit or with a sort of moderation of spirit, well, it's very good, but it's not standing ovation good, if you know what I mean. Ethan, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I think that's right. The human affairs that are being disdained here are those that are less brilliant than military glory. And so, making money and doing all these other things that people do are less impressive than the glory that one can win in battle. But also, as Ben said, and I think as you said as well, Chris, that there's also the possibility that there's a temptation involved here, that there's something that's too attractive about this that can lead us astray.
Can I make one additional point, Chris?
Please.
It's interesting also that he says these battles and these heroes, military examples of military glory become battlefields for orators, right? And so they kind of provide the source material for people like him, right, who are primarily distinguished by their oratory, and they are kind of almost, they have to give credit where it's due, right? They have to give, honor and glory, right, to where it's due. Whereas as we keep hinting, I think as Ethan just said, we can see that there's also a dark side to this military glory.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that takes us to the beginning of chapter 62. 62 and 63, I think, kind of run together. So, Ben, why don't you read both of those for us, please?
Certainly. However, if the loftiness of spirit that reveals itself amid danger and toil is empty of justice, if it fights not for the common safety but for its own advantages, it is a vice. It is not merely unvirtuous. It is rather a savagery which repels all civilized feeling. Therefore, the Stoics define courage well when they call it the virtue which fights on behalf of fairness. For that reason, no one has won praise who has pursued the glory of courage by treachery and cunning, for nothing can be honorable from which justice is absent. Therefore, Plato's words are splendid. Knowledge, he said, if separated from justice, should indeed be termed craftiness rather than wisdom. But furthermore, a spirit which is ready to face danger, but is driven by selfish desire rather than the common benefit, should be called not courage, but audacity. Therefore, we require men who are brave and of great spirit also to be good and straightforward, friends of truth, and not in the least deceitful. Such are the central qualities for which justice is praised.
Wow. Thank you, Ben. I'll take first comment here on these two chapters. Where do we find loftiness of spirit? We find that it absolutely must be in the presence of justice. There can be no greatness, no great deeds can be done if they are not just. Similar to some of his writings about friendship, right, where friendship must be between good men, between just men, we would say not only is the where the great deeds are done not for the common good and not for justice and not out of fairness, but it's opposite, thinking perhaps here of some of his contemporaries in the dying republic. It is not only falls short of virtue, but is a vice and savagery, right? So we would not praise anyone as great spirited and courageous who uses treachery and cunning. So there's this need to always be associated with the good, right? So the best in man, the best sort of the spiritual or sort of great souledness of us always needs to be oriented towards the what is good. There's no way of separating these things and praising the sort of the great spiritedness of the wicked. No praise for treachery or for cunning or for deeds that are done, that are accomplished in that way. So very anti-Machiavelli, to bring in another modern thinker whom we've consistently contrasted with Cicero. Ethan, would you like to continue?
Yes, right. So, and we've seen this this line before, but when we were talking about liberality, right? Liberality is good, but not without justice. If liberality is without justice, then it is not good. And so it's the same thing with the greatness of soul, that if it is done not for the common good, but to serve the selfish desire of him who wants to make himself first, then it is no longer a good thing. So justice is the measure by which these other virtues are assessed.
Ben?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking along those lines too. It's also interesting towards the end of chapter 63, truth also has to be that first original virtue of the search for truth also has to discipline, this impulse toward loftiness of spirit. And so, I mean, I think to back up, I mean, loftiness of spirit, it's the most brilliant, he said. It's the most, and it naturally attracts men of larger than life kinds of people, right? People who are of great ambition and competence, and it's a worthy prize, right? It's something that people respond to, and it makes sense. But it also sort of tends to maybe push people into it. It might tend to also push people into cunning and treachery, being like the fox and not like the lion, right? And so it tends to come along with temptations toward other not only, it's interesting, he says not only vices, but instances of beastliness, right? Savagery, where you're actually behaving below the level of a human being, as it's appropriate to behave for a human being, or a civilized human being at least.
Right, right. Why don't I take the next chapter is 64. It is a hateful fact that loftiness and greatness of spirit all too easily give birth to willfulness and an excessive desire for preeminence. We find in Plato that all the conduct of the Spartans was inflamed by desire for conquest. Similarly, the more outstanding an individual is in greatness of spirit, the more he desires complete preeminence, or rather to be the sole ruler. But when you desire to surpass all others, it is difficult to respect the fairness that is a special mark of justice. Consequently, such men allow themselves to be defeated neither by argument nor by any public or legal obligation. Only too often do they emerge in public life as bribers and agitators, seeking to acquire as much wealth as possible, preferring violent preeminence to equality through justice. The greater the difficulty, however, the greater the splendor. There is no occasion from which justice should be absent. I'm going to read 65 as well, if you guys don't mind. It is not therefore those who inflict injury, but those who prevent it, whom we should consider the men of courage and great spirit. A true and wise greatness of spirit judges that deeds and not glory are the basis of the honorableness that nature most seeks. It prefers not to seem preeminent, but to be so. So it prefers not to seem preeminent, but to be so. He who is carried by the foolishness of the ignorant mob should not be counted a great man. Furthermore, the loftier a man's spirit, the more easily he is driven by desire for glory to injustice. This is slippery ground indeed. Scarcely a man can be found who, when he has undertaken toil and confronted dangers, does not yearn for glory as a kind of payment for his achievements. Ethan?
Yes, so there's a lot going on in this section here, and I think this is one of those moments that's very polemical. So we have essentially two forms of government being commented on here. The one is essentially a kind of aristocracy, the aristocracy of the Senate, men who are more or less equal in their virtue and capability. And so that's what he's referring to when he speaks of the fairness that is the mark of justice. When you could think back to Aristotle, who says that if there is one man who is really so superior in virtue to all others, then maybe he should be absolute ruler. But where that does not exist, those men of virtue should share the power among themselves. And that is the model that Cicero is defending here. And on the other side, you have those men who think that they are the best and want to compete to become sole ruler. And the way they do that is by bribing the mob, by offering to the people, the common people, bread and circuses in exchange for an alliance against the aristocrats. So that's, I think that's the political subtext to this passage here. And of course, it's a question of principle as well, that for Cicero, the better form of government is the one in which men of virtue share power, as opposed to the one man who wants to be the first and is willing to do anything to get and maintain that position.
Just to add to that, I'm thinking that, I mean, again, back to the idea that loftiness of spirit disdains, the things, the affairs of life, or I'm forgetting the exact, disdaining human affairs, right? And so, in fact, rightly disciplined loftiness of spirit seeks to do great deeds, but not in fact, it's not about the praise that you'll receive for those great deeds. It's actually about the quality of the deed, discharge, the intrinsic goodness that our nature is actually seeking to fulfill our duties, right? And so we have to kind of, make sure we're disciplined. And I think that's also a kind of callback to, Plato's Republic, right? Where it's just because you can and you have the power to enforce your will upon others, to be the sole preeminent, person in the polis or the republic, you in fact ought to do things that are, in accord with justice. And so I think there's a really interesting thing going on here about both the sort of brilliance and the danger of this notion of loftiness of spirit.
Right. Well, let me ask you guys, perhaps this is too obvious to need comment, that Cicero is obviously polemicizing here as well against Caesar and Antony and other men who are sort of grappling to be the top man in the polity. So this is clearly directed at anyone who would subvert the equality and the equal virtue of the Senate. And it says it's slippery ground, very easy to slide, even with the best of intentions, from seeking glory to doing injustice. That clearly is here as well.
I think that's right. And I also, to take it one step further, I think, he was praised, or sort of giving their due to the people who achieve military glory and who have this loftiness of spirit that is obvious to everybody. But he is going to, at times throughout on duty, say, hey, my contribution was pretty great too, right? And I worked through oratory, right? And I worked through the Senate, right? I, worked through being collegial and treating people with equal justice, right? And so I do think he's kind of making this long contrast with people like Caesar and Antony and the way he has conducted himself to sort of obtain glory the right way, right?
That's right, of course. And he has mentioned already Sulla and Caesar by name with these kinds of criticisms. And of course, there's the whole set of orations, the Philippics against Antony. So yes, he very much has those men in mind as the ones who are truckling with the mob to undermine the authority of the Senate, and men who were not content with military glory itself, but they wanted everything. They wanted to be the top man in the entire republic with respect to everything. I mean, Caesar himself declared himself the not only dictator in perpetuity, but also Divus Invictus, invincible God. You are to view me as a god. That's where the deification of the emperors begins, is with Caesar. So, right, he's very much criticizing their ambition and their unrestrained ambition.
Okay, very good. We are at chapter 66. Ethan, would you please read 66 and 67 for us?
A brave and great spirit is in general seen in two things. One lies in disdain for things external, in the conviction that a man should admire, should choose, should pursue nothing except what is honorable and seemly, and should yield to no man, nor to agitation of the spirit, nor to fortune. The second thing is that you should, in the spirit I have described, do deeds which are great, certainly, but above all beneficial, and you should vigorously undertake difficult and laborious tasks which endanger both life itself and much that concerns life. All the splendor, the grandeur that I may add, the benefit of the two lie in the matter. Of the two lie in the latter. The cause of, the reason behind the greatness of men, however, is in the former. That is, the factor that makes men outstanding in spirit and contemptuous of human things. And in fact, this reveals itself in two ways. First, if you judge to be good only that which is honorable, and second, if your spirit is free from every agitation. For it must be held that a brave and great spirit will little value things that appear to most men distinguished and even splendid, disdaining them with reason firm and steady, while a man of firm spirit and great constancy will endure circumstances that seem harsh, many and various as they are in the lives and fortunes of mankind, without departing from man's natural state, from the worthy standing of a wise man.
Ben, what do you say?
I suppose I would mainly say that this strikes me as Cicero at his most stoic, right? I mean, he said, I like a lot of the things the Stoics have to say. I'm not going to always agree with them, but they say a lot of good things. And this strikes me as Cicero channeling, this kind of, firmness, steadiness, seeking things that are beneficial and honorable, that but sort of again, here's we see a little more reflection on this notion of disdain for human affairs, being to the point of, as you said, as you use the language, Chris, of contempt for human things. It's just they are not what I'm going to we're going to dictate my actions and my attempts to fulfill my duties, and so I'm going to seek for to do things that are evidence of loftiness of spirit, but the sort of first element of that is constancy in trying to do things that are honorable and are of benefit.
Right, and I'll add here that my notes on these chapters involve, of course, two things were given in chapter 66. You can see a brave spirit in two ways. In his contempt or disdain for external things, his love of honor alone, right? And so this nothing, not even his own life, matters to him as much as doing the excellent deed. And the second thing is the doing deeds that are great, beneficial, and risky, right? Things that involve you risking all that you have, up to and including your life. So if you're a cautious man, if you're a prudent man, if in the sort of modern sense, if you pull back from risking more than you can afford to lose, you're not a man of great spirit. But then he follows it up in the next chapter by saying the splendor and grandeur and benefit is in the latter, is in the doing of the great deeds. But the root, the cause, and the reason of greatness is in the former, is in the fact, the sort of deeper fact in your spirit, that you utterly disdain the loss of these things. You love honor so much that nothing else matters to you, as it were. Ethan, does that anything to
Yes,
add or
definitely.
contradict there?
I think that's all right. But I think what I would add is that in the previous paragraphs, he has been explaining what greatness of spirit looks like when it goes off the rails. And here he's trying to give us greatness of spirit properly understood. So greatness of spirit is done the right way when one does nothing except what is honorable and seemly, when one has decorum. So that's another virtue that we're going to discuss later on. And one yields to no man, and one doesn't yield to agitation of the spirit or fortune. So those are the more the virtues recommended by the Stoics. But for a man to have greatness of spirit in the proper way, it has to be combined with these other things, with these other habits and other virtues.
Excellent. Ben, let me ask you to conclude this episode by reading chapter 68 and let's say the first half of chapter 69.
Certainly. It is not consistent for a man who is not broken by fear to be broken by desires, nor for one who has proved himself unconquered by toil to be conquered by pleasure. Therefore you must avoid these, and shun also the desire for money. Nothing is more the mark of a mean and petty spirit than to love riches. Nothing more honorable and more magnificent than to despise money if you are without it. But if you have it, to devote it to liberality and beneficence. Beware also the desire for glory, as I have said, for it destroys the liberty for which men of great spirit ought to be in competition. Nor should you seek military commands. In fact, sometimes these should be refused, and sometimes even resigned. We must empty ourselves of every agitation of the spirit, desire and fear, of course, but also sorrow and excessive pleasure and anger, in order to gain that tranquility of spirit, that freedom from care, which ensures both constancy and standing.
Very good. Thank you, Ben. Of course, here, the last words here sound again, Cicero, very, very stoic, right? What we're looking for is inner tranquility, which will give you the ability to adopt this attitude of lofty contempt or disdain for the concerns of the general run of the human race, people who are concerned with these things. And he's begun by noting the sort of the lesser threats, we might say. These are the kind of minor players in the moral life, but still, a man who won't be broken by fear, he should not sort of fall into the smaller pit of valuing desire, falling into the pit of desire or pleasure or money. Specifically calls out, right, the sort of the mark of a small-souled man is that he's grasping for riches. He's very so. What does a great-spirited man do? He throws it to the wind. He's liberal in the best sense, right? He gives it away out of the sort of magnificence of spirit to show how little it matters to him compared to the small-souled man. So he also puts glory into this category. The desire for glory can become this kind of petty thing into which the great-spirited man can fall. Ethan, continue.
Yeah. So what occurs to me with this description of again, this is another description of the right sort of statesman, the gentleman who knows how to govern. And it just struck me in looking at these characteristics that he describes. He's describing all of the characteristics that our 21st century ruling class do not have, right? Lacking this petty spirit and love of riches, right? Our members of Congress who engage in insider trading and all these other things, and this lack of this control of one's temper, expressing oneself correctly in public, all of the characteristics that our ruling class do not have because they have not been trained in that, nor did they know that's how a ruler should behave. That's what occurs to me.
Ben?
I think the kind of the double negative in the very first sentence here, it is not consistent for a man who is not broken by fear to be broken by desires, right? So if you're a person who's of great spirit, fears maybe won't be your first problem. You're willing to face danger, right? You're willing to disdain, human affairs and even to give your life. But there are these other snares that can kind of turn you into the love of money in particular, the mark of a mean and petty spirit, right? It's like you kind of your greatness of spirit can be kind of soiled by attraction to these more mundane, lower level pleasure, money, these kinds of things. And I do think it's, as you both mentioned, just introducing this concept of liberty, which is not as we might think of it a lot of times in a kind of a Millian sense or a Hayekian sense, the idea of freedom from constraint from external factors. It's a freedom of soul, right? A freedom that your soul is not governed by these mean and petty desires. And so if you don't have them, you're just fine, right? And or money in particular. If you don't have money, you're just fine. If you do have money, you're liberal with it, as you mentioned, and so you're able to withstand any situation. I mean, we can actually hear, language like this from the Apostle Paul, right? I've learned to be content in every situation, right? Whether I have little or much. And so I know that if I should work, and if I can work so that I can give to others if I have it, but if not, I've learned to be content, right? And so obviously from a different sort of motivation, it's not from our own loftiness of spirit necessarily, but from our trust in Christ. But there is an interesting connection here with the kind of freedom that Cicero is saying is available, and actually people of great spirit ought to be. This is the kind of liberty you ought to be competing for.
Yes, absolutely. I like it would be excellent, I think, maybe later for us to try to contrast this kind of um, great spirited freedom with the humility of the Christian, with the sort of having perhaps the possibility of being great, but then also like, one of the saintly kings, giving it up. So
Mhm.
let me ask an exit question, if I might. But we might think of great spiritedness, especially in the classical sense, in the pagan sense, as being associated with ambition and with glory and with the desire to be human, sort of on the grandest, most magnificent, most public scale. And yet here Cicero, in this kind of stoic way, is saying that at the heart of that is this tranquility of this spirit, this freedom from all anxiety, or what's the word that he uses here? The overcoming any kind of
Agitation of the spirit.
agitation. That's the A word I was looking for. The spirit shouldn't be agitated and busy and rushing about. It should be so sort of above it all that it scarcely notices the loss that might be associated with one's worldly things, with great deeds. Is he sort of moving towards a kind of spiritual core of the sort of great activities of man? What do you two think of that?
Um, well, perhaps in moving in that direction, although I think for Cicero, this attitude that he's describing is necessary for the statesman. So to not be caught up in personal glory, one has to keep one's focus on seeking the common good, and this kind of stoicism is a necessary part of that. Not being overly agitated by the success or failure of one's last political stratagem, and also not being so concerned about how it affects oneself, right? If you fail, you fail. If you lose money, if you lose friends, that may be necessary, but you have to be prepared to do what is right in all circumstances, and keep your focus on that. And that's that requires certainly a different attitude from the one who desires his own personal preeminence above all.
Right. And on the question of, is this getting at a kind of deep spiritual sense of liberation? I mean, I would say it is, I think, to some degree, but at the same time, it's certainly all of this is in the context of all of the other virtues that he's talked about as well, especially the virtues that justice and liberality, right, that really do bond us to other human beings in various ways, right? And so it's certainly not. I don't think he's advocating a kind of detached, just focus on my own internal, well-being, but very much focus on, am I discharging my duties, right? Am I remaining constant and solid enough that regardless of circumstances, I have the kind of wherewithal to, act justly and to be beneficial to the people around me, especially to those who I have duties toward, and to the country, as Ethan said.
Right. It even sounds like it's a kind of Roman Ciceronian style, a sort of active political stoicism, rather than a kind of quietist, scholar, ivory tower stoicism.
Mhm.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. My co-hosts today have been Ethan Alexander-Davey and Ben Peterson. I've made it through more chapters of Book 1 of Cicero's On Duties. We'll hope you'll join us again next week for more, picking up where we left off in chapter 69 of book 1. Thank you for listening today. We hope if you like this podcast, please let some people know about it, share it with a friend, subscribe, and we look forward to continuing the journey with you next time. Goodbye. Welcome back to the On Duties podcast, a production of the Ciceronian Society. We are reading through chapter by chapter all of Cicero's great work on duties, and we hope that you will buy a copy for yourself, either a copy from Cambridge University Press or any other translation. There are some links in the description below this episode for how you can do that. You can read along and join with us as we read through and comment on the work. With a kind of rotating cast of characters, of commentators from the scholars associated with the Ciceronian Society. I am Chris Anadale. I teach philosophy at Mount St. Mary's University. Joining me again this week is Ben Peterson of Abilene Christian University. And joining us for the first time is James Patterson, the president of the Ciceronian Society, a man I like to call the Catholic Protestant Franco of our organization. James, would you like to introduce yourself to people and tell them a little bit about your academic background?
Oh, sure. I was a professor or as associate professor of politics at Ave Maria for 10 years. And I have since moved there, from there to the University of Tennessee. I just started last fall. So I'm at the Institute for American Civics.
What's your degree in, James?
I have an American government PhD, which is an unusual thing. Normally, it's just political science, but the University of Virginia had a somewhat more traditional degree naming scheme when I was still there. So I think it's just political science now. But I have a PhD in American government, and I got that a bachelor's degree from the University of Houston.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Welcome to the show. Ben, would you like to review your credentials for people who might be hearing about you for the first time, might have forgotten from last time?
Thanks again for the opportunity to be here with both of you, gentlemen. My PhD is in political science from Texas A&M University, and I kind of focused on political theory. And I teach government at Abilene Christian University. So I teach American politics and policy, political theory, and research methods.
Okay, and you've actually taught some Cicero in the classroom, is that right?
I teach an ancient political thought course, and we cover the Republic and the laws. And so that's kind of my background with Cicero. And I did have a chance recently to read, and I may come up in today's conversation. I had a chance to read Josiah Osgood's book, Lawless Republic, which focuses on Cicero, and it's a great book.
Oh, magnificent. That's great. We should talk more about that sometime in the future. Let's get to the text. And Ben, I'm going to ask you to lead us in this to begin with. We're on page 28 of this edition at book 1, chapter 69 of the text. We ended in the middle of chapter 69. So Ben, let me ask you to back up just to the beginning of it, because Cicero is going to begin by talking about a certain kind of tranquility of spirit, and then carry us in through and read through the end of chapter 70, please. And James, you'll take first comment after that, okay?
Yep.
We must empty ourselves of every agitation of the spirit, desire and fear, of course, but also sorrow and excessive pleasure and anger, in order to gain that tranquility of spirit, that freedom from care, which ensures both constancy and standing. There have been many, and there still are, who have sought that kind of tranquility by abandoning public business and fleeing to a life of leisure. These include the noblest and foremost philosophers, and also certain strict and serious men who could not endure the behavior of the populace or its leaders. Some of these have spent their lives on their estates, finding their delight in their family wealth. Their aim was the aim of kings, that needing nothing and obeying no one, they might enjoy liberty, the mark of which is to live just as one pleases. That aim, then, is common both to those who desire power and to such men of leisure. The former, however, think that they can achieve it by acquiring great wealth, the latter if they are satisfied with the little that is already theirs. Neither view should be utterly despised. Note, though, that the life of leisure is easier and safer, less troublesome to oneself or to others. Those, on the other hand, who have adapted themselves to great achievements in the service of the political community lead lives more profitable to mankind and more suited to grandeur and fame.
So we have,
James, go ahead, please.
oh yes. So we have here no small concern, right? This is the one of the primary questions of political philosophy, which is how is it to rule? How is it that we rule? And so we are to have a kind of motive, but the motives he's describing are the commonest ones, even among the great, right? Even among the people we celebrate. And so this idea of emptying ourselves of desire and fear sounds like, I mean, this is supposed to be a letter of practical advice, right? Like, my goodness, how difficult is it to empty what is no little matter to empty yourself of desire and fear. And then he describes the means by which people come to rule their desire for freedom, either by great wealth or by lowering the standard, right? Which I really like. So the standard, of course, you would still be free because you would need nothing. These are not even good enough solutions, but they're also incredibly difficult, right? So there's a way in which he's sort of understating how hard it is to do what he's describing. This is a tremendous underselling of the undertaking.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I'll add my 2 cents. I had 2 thoughts on listening to this again. One, it occurs to me just now that he could be speaking of 2 different types of academics. The ones who have made it at the R1 schools, who teach a 2-2 load and are highly compensated.
Hey! I worked hard for this job,
grinding away in the salt mines. Neither to be entirely despised, but some people succeed by lowering achieve the same goal by lowering their standard of living.
I have to admit, at my R1 job, I had an RA read this and just tell me what it said.
Okay.
And the comments I'm reading, he wrote down for me.
Wonderful. I look forward to the debut of the Patterson bot that'll just AI based on all your past writings, whatever your opinion is about any topic we ask.
Very important presiding over the Ciceronian Society to do. All right, I don't have time to read all of this nonsense from dead Romans with their tongues pierced.
My other thought was that here Cicero is already building a case that he's going to continue through the remaining chapters for although the philosophical life and the political life are both excellent, the political life is more excellent. And there's even some kind of subtle digs here that these men are kind of wanting to live like kings without enjoying the responsibility of kings. And there's the philosopher who values his leisure over the duties of the state is someone who's going to come in for more criticism in the chapters ahead. So, Ben, what were your thoughts, either along that line or in a new direction?
One, I'll just kind of repeat something I think I said in the last episode, but here we kind of see Cicero at his most stoic. You have to have this equanimity. I think he'll use that word later. This kind of tranquility of spirit, freedom from care. But I like James's question. It's kind of like, how do you actually? It's interesting that you do have to. It seems like you have to be able to achieve certain external conditions around yourself in order to maintain that level of kind of buffering from, fortune, as he'll later talk about, right? Or you have to have this really great spirit, to be able to like kind of go with the flow, as fortune comes and goes. It is interesting that he says, I'm not going to utterly despise either one of these, even though, to your point, Chris, it's better to do, to be the kind of person that can maintain this sort of equanimity and freedom from care as you're also making achievements for the public good, right? So, I mean, it's not quite as good as the truly, public-spirited, great-spirited person, but I get it. You may want to, just enjoy your nest egg or, just kind of, like you said, lower your expectations and be a philosopher.
Okay. Very good. We're off to a good start. Next, I think we'll tackle chapter 71. James, why don't you read that, and I'll have first comment.
Men of outstanding ability who have devoted themselves to learning rather than choose public life, or those who have retired from public life hampered by ill health or some quite serious cause, should therefore perhaps be excused when they yield to others the power and the praise of governing. When, however, those without a reason claim to despise the commands and magistracies which most men admire, I do not think that should be counted as praiseworthy. Indeed, no, but rather as a vice. It is a difficult thing not to approve their view insofar as they disdain glory or think it worthless, but they appear to be afraid of hard work and trouble, and also, or so it seems, the humiliation and disrepute which results from failure and defeat. For there are those who are so inconsistent in opposite circumstances that they despise pleasure with the utmost rigor, but are weak when faced with pain. Glory they ignore, but they are broken by humiliation, and they are not very constant even in this. Ooh.
Wow. Again, my mind goes to the criticisms of the academics, right? This is the academic who's lazy and cowardly and would like to have the comfort of the intellectual life, free of the demands of service, political service, or the risks involved, the pain and the humiliation involved with taking the risks and failing as often as you succeed, failing sometimes at least. Of course, we know Cicero writing this. This is his final work. He's executed a little over a year after completing it. But this is, it's the place where he sticks the knife in, right? This sounds admirable. The Platonic, above it all philosopher. This is, taking issue not for the first or last time with Plato. The philosopher, the intellectual who's able to be above it all seems admirable, but isn't it really the case that he's just afraid of the hard work? He doesn't want to risk himself by fulfilling his duty to the community, by taking the risks and actually bearing sort of in his person, in his psyche, the wounds that will result from, getting beat up in the arena, sometimes winning, but sometimes inevitably losing as well. So the problem here is that the philosopher king, who rules only kind of with a kind of lofty disdain, is not really the proper political model. He is, in a sense, almost just half a man. He needs to be the complete vir, the complete virtuous man, to in order to complete the demands of duty. Ben, what do you think?
Well, just to keep jabbing at academics, for once, I think Tocqueville at one point says, philosopher, you wouldn't become a philosopher or like something like that if you were actually successful in like affairs of the world, right? Those are people who can't make it in the in the world, and of course, I mean, it's kind of fits Tocqueville a little bit, but anyway, this passage here, one thing that struck me is that he's concerned. In previous chapters, he has said, people of great soul, they might be not afraid to risk their lives in battle, but some of them are pulled aside by pleasure, right? Are pulled aside from the true greatness of spirit by pleasure. Here he's saying, okay, and some people are able to despise pleasure, but they're too afraid to, like you said, risk, their lives and fortune. They might paint it as disdaining glory, and that's a good thing, right? Disdaining, that's the disdain for human affairs that he wants people to have. But it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if it's Aquinas or somebody who, the right action is not only the action itself, right? But it's the right motive for the action as well. It's the right action with the right motive, with due regard for the consequences. And I think that's kind of Cicero in these chapters gets kind of exacting, right? It's like you can't only do something that appears to be something that a great souled person would do. Why are you really doing it? Is it really because of fear of, your own position, losing your ability to live like a king, right, and do what you please, right? And so it's a really interesting, call to examination of your true motives, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. James?
I've been casting about for a quotation by an English poet, something like, "Cast your eyes upon me, I yearn for accusation." And it was Dan Mahoney that brought it up with me, and I've been sort of frantically Googling. Hopefully, it wasn't picked up by the microphone while doing this, and I have failed. Dan Mahoney isn't the one who said it. He quoted it to me in an interview I did with him at Law and Liberty, and it stuck with me. Obviously, not entirely. Like I forgot the author. But there are two senses in which when I read this, the first I think is probably the intended, which is that some people don't want to be disliked, and so they'll do whatever they can in order to ensure that they retain their friendships. And the other is that some people like to be humiliated. They think that there's a kind of there's a way in which the humiliation or the disrepute exonerates them from having to do any work. And I'm not sure if that's an intended reading here, or if I'm misreading here, but it's this line here, but that they despise pleasure with the utmost rigor, but are weak when faced with pain. Glory they ignore, but they are broken by humiliation. The reason that he's describing this is these are people who refuse to command. They refuse to do the work. And in a way, being hated is a good way out of having to do that. And the reason I think of this is of how often we've seen people, when faced with like angry crowds claiming a kind of mantle of victimhood, they essentially give the person in charge an excuse for not enforcing the laws against riots or what have you. And so I'm not sure again if this is the right reading, but it's the one that kept leaping to me when I was thinking about this earlier today.
Yeah, I'll if we can find that quote, I'll put it in the show notes when I'm editing this episode for publication. That's great. Yeah, yeah. Let me move on to chapter 72 and 73. I'll read those, and Ben, ask you to take first comment. Okay,
Sure.
Fair. But those who are equipped by nature to administer affairs must abandon any hesitation over winning office and engage in public life. For only in this way can either the city be ruled or greatness of spirit be displayed. No less than philosophers, and I suspect even more so, must those who choose public life acquire the magnificent disdain for human affairs that I stress, and tranquility of mind, and freedom from care. Otherwise, how would they live without anxiety, with seriousness, and with constancy? This is easier for philosophers, in that there is less in their life which is vulnerable to the blows of fortune, and their needs are fewer. And if they do meet with misfortune, their fall cannot be so severe. It is with good reason, therefore, that greater impulses to achieve greater things are aroused in the spirits of those who engage in public life than of those who live quietly. Therefore, they need greatness of spirit and freedom from anguish all the more. When anyone does undertake public business, he should remember to reflect not only on how honorable that is, but also on whether he has the capacity to succeed. Here he must take thought so that indolence does not make him despair prematurely, nor greed spur him to overconfidence. Before you approach any business, thorough preparations must be made.
So a couple thoughts, jump out at me I think this is a really interesting couple of chapters. I mean, I think a little bit of this one and the last one, or the last sections we read of, the idea, Teddy Roosevelt's idea, the man in the arena, right? It's, hey, get in there and be ready to take what fortune's going to throw at you. It's not honorable. It's actually a vice to, sit out of the political arena when in fact you are fitted for it, right? You are a person who, I've actually thought before it would be really cool to have, a lot of the Shakespearean tragedies are about people who are too grasping, who are trying to go beyond, take too much power or something like that. But what about the person who does not, who sort of fails to, assume the position of authority and responsibility that they're fitted for by nature? And I think he's getting at that. I even thought of the, Jesus' parable of the talents too. It's kind of like the man who buries his talent and the master is totally upset with him, because you squandered it. You squandered your gifts, right? So I think that something like that is even here too. Now then, once again, I mean, toward the end, Cicero, he's very exacting. He's like, okay, you should not be afraid to, don't squander your talents. Get in there and have the greatness of spirit to accept what fortune throws at you, even if you fail. Also, make sure you take thought and don't fail, right? So I mean, it's very, don't be over hasty to do things. Make sure you're prepared and you're giving yourself the best chance of success, even knowing that you might fail. There's just kind of a lot going on there.
There's also a certain amount of Cicero assessing his own life here. He's a philosopher of some kind, right? And he didn't eschew public life, and there were others who did in the philosophical tradition, right? In a way, like the only one that really matches him is the original Socrates, right? He serves in the Athenian assembly, right? And the others were too aristocratic for their own good, and Cicero, having that aristocratic bearing, is insisting on this, and in a way, it's an attempt to kind of vindicate, the choices that he made. He was able to do both, and that last thing that Ben said really got me. Don't forget to succeed. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, Cicero. Who's running the show over in Rome? It ain't you now, right? I don't really know the relationship here that well between he and his son, but Cicero doesn't know how things are going to go down next. And so he might be pleading with an effort to kind of revert Rome back from whatever it is as transpiring, and of course that's not what happens.
Yeah, I'd endorse everything that's been said so far, and just with reiterating that this sounds like father writing to his son, his young adult son, old enough to get into trouble, but maybe not old enough to really have some wisdom, earn some wisdom of his own. And so, yeah, the other thing, of course, continuing this criticism of Plato, that the philosopher king, the one who gets away from it all and sort of dwells purely with the ideas in the ivory tower, not the ideal. He has a duty. He has an officium to the community and to the people. And if he's able to, he leaves out one half of justice, we said in a previous episode. He's just in one way, but he's unjust because he's letting people down, people who are depending upon him and people who could use the fruits of his gifts if he were more courageous and more able to act out and take the risks that virtue demands, that duty demands. I think next we'll tackle chapters 74, 75, and 76. Ben, if you'd read those, and we'll have James do the first comment. Thank you.
Okay. Most men consider that military affairs are of greater significance than civic. I must deflate that opinion, for men have not infrequently sought war out of desire for glory. This has most often been true of men of great spirit and talent, and all the more so if military service suits them and they love the business of warfare. However, if we are prepared to judge the matter correctly, many achievements of civic life have proved greater and more famous than those of war. Themistocles may rightly be praised, and his name possess greater renown than Solon's. Salamis may be summoned as a witness to a famous victory, which may indeed be ranked above the counsel that Solon showed when he instituted the Areopagus. In fact, however, the latter should be judged no less splendid than the former. For the former benefit was a single one, the latter will serve the city forever. By that counsel, the very laws of the Athenians and their ancestral institutions are preserved. Themistocles could claim to have helped the Areopagus in nothing. The Areopagus, however, might truly claim to have assisted him. The very war was waged according to the counsel of the Senate that Solon had established. The same may be said about Pausanias and Lysander. It may be thought that their achievements won for Sparta imperial rule, but they cannot begin to be compared with the laws and discipline instituted by Lycurgus, which were, rather, the very causes of their having armies so well trained and courageous. I did not consider that Marcus Scaurus in my boyhood yielded anything to Gaius Marius, nor Catullus to Pompey when I myself was involved in public life. Arms have little effect abroad if there is no counsel at home. Africanus was outstanding as a man and as a general, but when he destroyed Numantia, he benefited the Republic no more than did Publius Nasica at the same time when, though a civilian, he killed Tiberius Gracchus. The deed, it is true, was not a matter merely of civilian methods. Affected as it was by physical force, it involved methods appropriate to war. However, it was civic council that prompted it, and no army was involved.
There's a long debate over whether the New England Patriots had to credit Tom Brady or Bill Belichick more. And real ones know it's Belichick, although he's not doing so great now. And I actually don't know. I'm just taking a position. But that's the issue here. I took that position because that seems to be the one that Cicero is taking, right? It's all fine, to praise a general leading an army into battle, but who formed that general, right? Who gave that general the orders? What is that general defending, right? And that general exists not for conquest, but for defense of a city, the civic matters, the place where people achieve their highest degree of development is in the city. And so it's not really a war alone that's going to be the basis for greatness. There also needs to be respect for civic leaders, often not given to them because people will take their leadership for granted, or they may actually not like that leader because the leader's done things that ran contrary to their interests. And in this respect, we're also again sort of hearing the echoes of the recent events in Cicero's life, right? People seem to really like generals these days, but they'd be nothing if there weren't a city that for them to defend.
Right. I'll just amplify that. Of course, the long series of examples here is about the benefits of institution building over the kind of one-time glory of victory in war. The battle enters history, Thermopylae, Salamis, and other battles, enters history as this sort of glorious thing in the retelling. But as you pointed out, James, for the battle, the army, the courage is all made possible by the civic institutions that have strengthened the state. So where should an ambitious young man seeking glory and anxious to best use his talents for the city, where should he devote himself? Well, military service is great, but civic service and the building of institutions, the creation of constitutions, and the upholding of civic virtue and civic life is more glorious still and more worthy of higher honor. It just seems to be, again, Cicero, the politician, coming out not to disdain the one, but to vindicate the one that is more easily ignored, especially in times of conflict and warfare. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think he began the section about greatness of spirit, talking about how it's an interesting one of the sort of virtues because it does have this double edge. It has this potential for, people obviously are attracted to military glory, right? There's something very kind of almost primal about it. We see this display of courage, of greatness in a very intense way, but he begins this section here, people might get us into a dangerous war, a war that's not based for good reason, that's not a defensive war or it's not an honorable war, so that they can, kind of shortcut to that kind of glory, right? Whereas wise counsel, wise deliberation, it's not as flashy, it's not as obvious, it's not as people aren't maybe like you said flocking to it as much as they are in Cicero's day. But it can lay the foundations for enduring achievement, enduring political benefit. So I think that's very interesting. And yes, of course, I mean, not to steal the thunder from the next chapter, but I mean, we're very much leading up to like, oh yeah, by the way, remember when I saved the Republic? That was me being super awesome, leading, acting in the civilian role, right?
Mhm.
And that's Rome's greatest moment, And I also wonder, I mean, it's not quite a strict, civilian control of the military idea, but there does seem to be a kind of rudiment of that idea here, the notion that the council, the deliberative element, ought to be in control of the arms bearing sort of part of the city or the empire as it may be.
Right. Very good. We're running a little bit long on this episode, but I think I'd like to finish with chapter 77 and 78, which are quite short and kind of bring this whole train of thought to a close. James, would you read those and I'll comment first?
The best expression of all this is the verse which, I gather, is often attacked by shameless and envious men. Let arms yield to the toga and laurels to laudation. To mention no others, when I held the helm of the Republic, did not arms then yield to the toga? Never was there more serious danger to the Republic than then, and never was there greater quiet. Through my vigilance and my counsel, the very arms swiftly slipped and fell from the hands of the most audacious citizens. Was any achievement of war ever so great? What military triumph can stand in comparison? I am allowed to boast to you, Marcus, my son, for yours it is both to inherit my glory and to imitate my deeds. Pompey himself, indeed, whose military exploits won lavish praise, paid me the tribute of saying in the hearing of many that he would have won his third triumph in vain had my service to the Republic not ensured that he had somewhere to celebrate it. Therefore, the courageous deeds of civilians are not inferior to those of soldiers. Indeed, the former should be given even more effort and devotion than the latter.
Well, this is what it's been leading up to, in a sense. This is both Cicero celebrating himself, but of course, it's as Babe Ruth famously said, it's not bragging if you can do it, or if you have done it. The magnanimous man would just tell the truth about himself. I am, in fact, one of the greatest statesmen of Rome. And then speaking directly to his son, which is a thing we've not heard, I think, in a while in this book. Marcus, yours it is to inherit my glory, okay, to sort of benefit from being my son, and to imitate my deeds and to earn glory for yourself. So this is about as straight as Dad can ever say it to one of his grown children, right? It's I I have distinguished myself and built a name for our family in this particular arena of civic life. It is superior to the sort of hard-hitting warfare that other people that's more obviously admirable, but it really does deserve the higher honor, the greater effort, and it should attract the attention of the highest quality of men, including young Marcus. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, we really just see Cicero's humility coming out here, as one of those duties we should be. No, I mean, he says he even kind of acknowledges that he's boasting, right? It's a kind of father to son, as you mentioned, it's remarkable, and I mean, it is kind of at once his defense of his own actions, Which, by the way, he can cite Pompey, right? As someone who has given him the honor that is appropriate, he thinks, to that action. At the same time,
in front of witnesses too. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, in front of others, right? And so, and it was true. I mean, he did receive lots of, honor and glory from that. I want to say one more thing about that actual event in a second, but it is at the same time, it's the kind of culmination or capstone of his argument for sort of, the greater glory belonging to successful service for the Republic in the civilian in civil affairs. It's interesting because a couple things about the actual event. I mean, his example here, this is him, saving the Republic, quelching the Catiline conspiracy, right, and actually urging the Senate to require an extrajudicial execution of the conspirators, right? Or and it was fascinating in the Osgood book that I mentioned, The Lawless Republic. He points out that it's actually none other than Julius Caesar himself who spoke against that decision and said, this may set in motion a precedent you don't want to see continued. Like this may set a precedent for extra legal violence, political violence, essentially politically, sanctioned violence. And so it's just remarkable now, of course, obviously Caesar made his own moves to undermine the fabric of the Republic, right? But Cicero was a part of this kind of contested, situation where the norms and rules were being, violated. At the same time, he's trying to respond to dangers to the Republic. So it's just a fascinating situation, and it kind of is interesting. He has that other example of Publius Nasica, where he's also a civilian who is ordering a kind of execution, and he's in the same kind of role, right? Where he's a civilian leader, but he is sort of urging the use of force to protect the Republic as he sees it, right? And so it's just that it's a lot of interesting things at play there. And it is kind of it's interesting to read just such a forthright, claim of proper glory, properly pursued and achieved, that he is trying to hand down to Marcus. And, I don't know, remember, he's trying to draw Marcus away from a purely philosophic, leisurely life, but maybe also from a purely military, military glory seeking life as well.
So Cicero's right. He's just right about this. He is amazing. He's an amazing guy. And so, I don't feel a bit bad. It also kind of points to how, often when you read greats like Cicero, when you see something that kind of doesn't click right, it kind of just goes past you. And Cicero's complete lack of reference to a kind of Christian humility, right, is just sort of like, whoa, right? Like, he is a pagan, right? He is a pagan, and in every way. And so, his greatness is not going to be sort of deflated the way that he wants to deflate military greatness. One other thing is, I don't have anything to improve on the previous statement, so I'll just add something that is I thought was so weird to read. Is we normally associate Rome with like greatness, maybe in engineering and military matters, and here you have let arms yield to the toga. Right? This is not something you normally associate with Rome because it was not yet the empire. And so this really does indicate like what a tremendous change Rome undergoes from the late Republic to the early Empire, that no one would say this anymore after a certain point. And in fact, they reverse it. And it's not clear that to me that Cicero knows that's what's going to happen. He seems to more, quietly worry.
Oh, by the way, he's quoting himself with that. Like, even that line is his own.
Oh, no way. What's that from?
Yeah, it's at, well, the note here, Comes
Oh,
from book 3 of Cicero's poem On His Own Times.
ah,
So he's quoting himself at the same time.
I'm looking at the there's a bunch of boring details to my life right now that have made me have to use the digital version, and so the notes aren't as convenient, so I missed that.
Oh, wow. I had one closing thought I might add here. Just occurred to me listening to you guys talk. That I wonder if Cicero hasn't here sort of self-consciously inverted the hierarchy that we get from Plato in a sense where you think of the politician as dealing in some sense with the kind of the management type of the city, the military, the soldier dealing with the survival of the city, representing a sort of the sort of thumos, middle part of the soul, and then the philosopher being the intellectual, being the sort of highest, best kind of person, maybe sort of compelled to rule in a way, but really preferring to just contemplate justice, for example. And Cicero gives us a place where actually the intellectual who sort of lacks the courage to take the risks of civic life has kind of been left pretty far behind. And now we're sort of looking at, is the military man who saves the republic superior in glory to the civic person who saves the republic through speech and through
Right.
institution building? And actually there it's the civic, it's the Cicero who is higher than the military figure, the general. And that the idea of a purely intellectual life is kind of, inferior in glory, although not to be utterly despised. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yeah, I do. I think that's especially the case when he assesses what it means to be a kind of an aristocratic figure in Rome. That there's a kind of idleness, a kind of what he describes as indolence is a term that he seems to favor. I've just done a straight read all the way through to where we're gonna hopefully end up, and that seems to be a preoccupation with him. He thinks philosophers don't really get enough done, which isn't a funny thing because like that's very Roman. There's a real distinction here between Rome and Greece.
Yeah. Ben, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just on what you were saying, there is this interesting he as James said a little bit earlier. I mean, he is a philosopher, right? He's not throwing shade on philosophy as such, but he does want it to be employed. He thinks it especially for one who has the gift or is endowed by nature with the ability to shape public events and to give service to the country. It's an injustice to deprive the country of that, the republic of that. And so, yeah, I mean, it is philosophy or philosophy informed politicking, that I think and civil council leadership that really gets the highest praise. And I think it also connects a little bit with, remember his we talked about in some previous episodes, who do we most owe, liberality to? And it's the country, and it's gratitude based kind of hierarchy of who to whom we owe things and ought to give our time, energy, attention to. And so the Republic claim, the country claims for him a very high and the highest, share of our attention and effort and everything. And so this in some ways could also connect to that.
Right. Well, this is definitely Cicero, at his peak Cicero, we might say. This is doing what he does. So that brings us to the end, I think, of this episode of the On Duties podcast. We've read through the end of chapter 79 of On Duties. I'm sorry, 78 of On Duties. We'll pick up at that point with chapter 79 next week. I hope you'll join us next Wednesday for another look, reading through On Duties. I want to thank Ben Peterson and James Patterson for joining us today. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye. Welcome back to the On Duties podcast, where we'll be reading through all of Cicero's great work, De Officiis, On Duties, one of his most influential works, with a rotating cast of co-hosts from the scholars associated with the Ciceronian Society. We hope you'll read along with us. Maybe check out this series from the beginning if you're seeing it for the first time. To find out more about our programs and our other podcasts, our conferences and journals, please go to ciceroniansociety.org. I'm Chris Anadale. I teach philosophy at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues and regulars on the podcast. Would you guys care to introduce yourself briefly? Ethan first and then Ben?
Yes, Ethan Alexander-Davey. I teach political science at Campbell University, focusing on political theory and constitutional law, and also I have a course on ancient political thought, of which Cicero is an important figure.
Well, thanks, Chris. I'm Ben Peterson. I teach political science at Abilene Christian University, and I also teach some political theory classes, and including a class on ancient political thought, and where we teach the Republic and the laws. And so it's been a lot of fun to dive into on duties.
Great. Okay. My experience teaching Cicero has been limited to teaching his On Friendship to high school students. So you guys both have more university experience with these texts and with this thinker than I have. We are in the middle of book one. We're about halfway through book one right now at chapter 79. We have we are finishing up with Cicero's treatment of the third virtue of greatness of spirit. And so we're moving into a section now that I wrote in my notes down as advice to statesmen. So this is just how one should go about pursuing virtue while governing the state well. Why don't Ethan, why don't I ask you to begin with reading chapters 79 through 81, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm. That honorableness that we seek from a lofty and magnificent spirit is in general produced not by bodily strength, but by strength of spirit. However, we must exercise the body, training it so that when it has to attend to business or endure hard work, it is able to obey counsel and reason. The honorableness that we seek depends entirely upon the concern and reflection of the spirit. In this field, the civilians who are in charge of public affairs provide no less a benefit than those who wage war. And so it is by often their counsel that a war may be avoided or terminated, and sometimes declared. It was through Marcus Cato's counsel that the Third Punic War was declared, and his authority had effect even after his death. We must therefore value the reason which makes decisions above the courage which makes battle. Yet we must be careful to do that because we have reasoned about what is beneficial, and not merely for the sake of avoiding war. Moreover, war should always be undertaken in such a way that one is seen to be aiming only at peace. It is the mark of a truly brave and constant spirit that one remain unperturbed in difficult times, and when agitated not to be thrown, as the saying goes, off one's feet, but rather hold fast to reason with one's spirit and counsel ready to hand.
Would you continue through 81 as well? I think that'll make a piece.
Yeah. That is the mark of a great spirit, but this is the mark also of great intellectual talent, to anticipate the future by reflection, deciding somewhat beforehand how things could go in either direction, and what should be done in either event, never acting so that one will need to say, I had not thought of that. Such is the work of a spirit not only great and lofty, but also relying on good sense and good counsel. To charge rashly into battle and engage the enemy hand to hand is monstrous and beast-like. But if the necessity of the occasion demands, one must fight hand to hand, preferring death to slavery or dishonorableness.
Okay, thank you very much. Ben, why don't you take lead comment on that? What do you think?
I think the big takeaway I have from these chapters would be something like the supremacy of reason. It seems to be the big message here. So we begin with, our body ought to be under the control of reason. So he recommends some greatness of spirit is not primarily about bodily strength, but it's aided by training your body so that your body will obey your reason, right? And I think even of an echo there of the Apostle Paul, right? Physical training is of some value. But it's interesting. I wonder if there's a parallel going on between the way that our bodily appetites and our bodies ought to be under the control of our reason, in the same way that the state or the republic ought to be under the control of the council, the reasoning elements, the civilian leaders, as he's been talking about. At the same time as we have to be, physical training is good for the body. The ability to engage in military activity is also a necessity for the state as well. So I think the control of reason seems to be the supremacy of reason seems to be one of the big messages here.
Yeah, I got some of the same instincts, some of the same reactions. I'm sorry, about this. Seems to continue his thought about the civilian, the greater dignity and excellence of the civilian over the military. That is, the mind that directs the war is superior to the muscle that fights the war, though both are necessary and both are even glorious and fitting objects for a great spirited man to aspire to. Yet he's just finished saying to his son, that between the two you should follow in my footsteps, which is where the man can do the greater good for the greater glory, which he even notes in the past that the military triumph is depended upon the right rule of the republic in his own case. The one thing I would add to what you said was that we get this kind of imperative to join the goods of intellect to your greatness of spirit, right? Be great spirited through military might, but also if you have those gifts, bring the intellect online and sort of combine these things to be the most fully glorious that one can be. This is where the object of highest ambition should lie. Ethan?
Yes, well, I'll just add that I know we of course have said before many times that Cicero should not be seen as derivative, that he is his own man, but there are definite echoes of Socrates and Plato here, right? So the implicit criticism, and it'll make it more explicit a little later, of timocracy, of the Spartan model, where the honor lovers are in charge and they make decisions on the basis of honor, which is gained by military glory. But for Cicero, as for Plato, reason is first, and the thinking about the good of all, the good of the entire community, becomes before that virtue of courage. So courage is to serve the good of all, and the one therefore must of course have echoes of Aristotle here as well. One has to judge when it is appropriate to use courage and when it is not, or when it is appropriate to wage war and when one should try to avoid war. So there's a similarity of thinking certainly between Cicero and Plato on all of these points.
Can I say one more thing on this, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Love the line. First of all, your goal should be to act in a way that you'll never have to say, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that possibility." That make sure you're thinking through all the contingencies that might happen once you consider whether you're going to engage or not engage in a war and things like that. Great line. And also, I mean, it connects to his earlier point that what makes us different from other animals is in part our ability to have foresight and think about the consequences of our actions. And so I think there's a connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Which is especially important in the questions about whether to go to war or not. That's one thinks about contemporary events in that context.
Yeah, surely. If I could add one more textual note myself, I made a mark here that towards the end of chapter 80, he mentions war should always be undertaken in such a way that one is seen to be aiming only at peace. And that perked up my ears as a philosopher. One should aim at peace, and one should make sure that everybody in the world knows that you're aiming at peace. This is the statesman speaking, right? It's not enough to have this intention, to have that be your goal. You have to act in such a way that demonstrates that for all the world to see. And that's the duty of an intelligent and wise and just statesman, is to conduct the affairs of state such that there's no or minimal opportunity for misunderstanding among one's allies and one's enemies. So that seems also to be part of the circumspection that the intellectual, great-spirited man who uses reason will bring to his tasks. Ben, I think the next section is will get us from chapters 82 through 84. If you'd read through the end of 84, that's page 33. I'll take the first comment on that and then pass it off to Ethan.
Okay. In the case of destroying and plundering cities, it is particularly important to take care that nothing is done with recklessness or cruelty. It is also the mark of a great man in times of unrest to punish the guilty, but to preserve the mass of people, holding fast to what is upright and honorable, whatever fortune may bring. For just as some, as I have mentioned above, put war before civic affairs, so you will find many to whom dangerously hot-headed counsels seem greater and more brilliant than calm and considered ones. We must never purposefully avoid danger so as to appear cowardly and fearful, yet we must avoid exposing ourselves pointlessly to risk. Nothing could be stupider than that. When confronting danger, therefore, we should copy the doctor, whose custom it is to treat mild illnesses mildly, though he is forced to apply riskier, double-edged remedies to more serious illnesses. Only a madman would pray for a facing storm during a calm, but when a storm does arise, the wise man meets it using all his reason. That is particularly so when a successful outcome may bring more good than the period of uncertainty evil. The dangers attending great undertakings fall sometimes upon their authors and sometimes upon the nation. Again, some are called to put their lives at risk, others their glory and the goodwill of their fellow citizens. We must therefore be eager to risk our own, to risk our own than the common welfare, and readier to fight when honor and glory than when other advantages are at stake. However, many have been found who were willing to pour out on their country's behalf not only money, but even life itself, yet they would not make the slightest sacrifice of glory, not even when the nation was crying out for it. Callicratidas, for example, had, as the Spartan general in the Peloponnesian War, performed many notable deeds. At the last, however, he undermined them all by disobeying the counsel of those who thought the fleet should have left Arginusae rather than engage the Athenians. His reply was that if the Spartans lost their fleet, they could build another, whereas for him, flight was impossible without disgrace. That blow was a moderate one to the Spartans, but this was ruinous. When Cleombrotus recklessly engaged Epaminondas because he feared unpopularity, all Sparta's resources were destroyed. How much better Quintus Maximus! Aeneas writes of him, "When one man alone restored our affairs by delaying, our safety he preferred to all thought of his fame. Therefore the hero's glory now shines, and ever more brightly." We must avoid that type of error even in civic affairs, for there are those who do not dare to say what they think, however excellent it may be, through fear of unpopularity.
Thanks very much, Ben. That's excellent. My first thought on reading this, well, first, it's an advice about prudence, right? To be a prudent statesman, to think calmly, and to be willing to make sacrifices, not only of money, but also of glory and of reputation. That's the story of the Spartan general who says, well, you can replace the fleet, but if I disgrace myself by retreating from battle, that's a permanent loss to me and to the city. That seems outrageous, and we have sort of kind of an excess of great spiritedness, like in excess of what reason would command. And so he ends with, of course, the poem about the man who sacrificed his own glory for the good of the state, and so now he attains even further glory in the after time. I like the final line of chapter 34 here. There are those who will not dare to say what they think for fear of unpopularity. And this brings to my mind, not for the last time in this bank of chapters, the contrast with Machiavelli and the person who will act out of fear of reputation, be sort of bluffed into doing something that's not wise. So that's apart from the examples, it seems to me to be a sort of advice to statesmen consists of be prudent, be cautious, and be willing to put everything on the line if reason and wisdom demands it for the good of the state. Ethan, what are your thoughts?
Well, similar to yours, I do like the analogy of the statesman here to the doctor, right? Depending on how severe the illness, the cure should be proportional to the illness. So if we have a more dangerous situation, we may have to use more force and more violence, but it all depends on the situation, and the amount of force should be proportional to the danger. Right, you covered, Chris, the problems with the Spartan approach here, the timocratic approach, right, which emphasizes glory above all else. And here we have Cicero's statesman who is prepared to sacrifice his own glory for the good of the state, and to be more willing to risk himself than to risk the common welfare. And that's it seems obvious that a statesman should do that and think that, but and yet we don't see too many examples of it, at least in modern times. It seems politicians are concerned first and foremost with their reputation and their popularity, and it's hard to find a statesman who truly appears to act in this way and to think in this way.
Ben?
First of all, I love the beginning parenthetical statement of chapter 82. In the case of destroying and plundering cities, it is particularly important to take care that nothing is done with recklessness or cruelty, right? So, plunder and destroy the city, but very, gently and kindly, right? It's just kind of a funny thing, but
in line with reason, I suppose. If it's got to be destroyed, it's got to be destroyed. And just destroy it well, correctly, and in line with the way a virtuous person would plunder a city.
Exactly, right? And I suppose, again, biblical parallels, right? Hey, don't go in, make sure you devote the booty to the Lord, right? And not take it for yourself. There are other sort of examples of this, kind of like, hey, it matters even your conduct, even when you're sacking a city, But the other thing that strikes me that is kind of seems like one of the themes that's emerging when he's discussing these different virtues is that people are going to be prone to erring one way or another. And it's going to, the way of virtue, the way of duty, of properly performed duties is really hard to get right, because the person who's going to be inclined to be brave and to be courageous and great-souled in that way is also going to be inclined to be thirsty for glory, and therefore inclined to not take the wise counsel that says, hey, it's not the time for battle, right? It's time for parlay, right? And so on the other hand, the person who's more inclined to be prudent might also be a little more inclined to be cowardly, right? And not be ready to engage the enemy when it's time to engage the enemy, right? And so finding that where you're willing to face the storm if it comes, but you're not recklessly seeking danger for yourself or your city is a very narrow path, right? And I do think that's kind of what's striking me in these examples.
Absolutely. Any final comment before we move on?
I think we covered it.
Okay, great. I think it's my turn to read. I'll read, and Ethan, give you first comment. The next section, I'm going to take chapters 85 and 86 together. Okay. In general, those who are about to take charge of public affairs should hold fast to Plato's two pieces of advice. First, to fix their gaze so firmly on what is beneficial to the citizens that whatever they do with that in mind, forgetful of their own advantage. Secondly, let them take care for the whole body of the republic rather than protect one part and neglect the rest. The management of the republic is like a guardianship and must be conducted in the light of what is beneficial not to the guardians, but to those who are put in their charge. By consulting the interests of some of the citizens and neglecting others, they bring upon the city the ruinous condition of unrest and strife. Consequently, some appear as populares, and others as devotees of the best men, but few as champions of everyone. That was the reason for serious strife in Athens. In our republic, it has caused not merely unrest, but even disastrous civil war. That is something which any serious, courageous citizen who is worthy of preeminence in the republic will shun with hatred. He will devote himself entirely to the republic, pursuing neither wealth nor power, and will protect the whole in such a way that the interest of none is disregarded. He will expose no one to hatred or unpopularity by making false accusations. He will, in sum, so adhere to justice and what is honorable that in preserving them he will endure any reverse, however serious, and face death rather than abandon those things I have mentioned.
Yeah, so this is a particularly rich passage, and I know I had a reason for referring to Plato, right? So here he's citing Plato, but so the one of the roles of the statesman is to understand that the republic is composed of different parts, of different social classes, different groups, and to understand that it's his duty to try to harmonize those different groups. And so he talks more about this on the Republic. He compares the statesman somewhat to the conductor of an orchestra, someone who is able to bring the different musical instruments into a harmony, just as to bring the different classes into a harmony with each other, so that the interests of all are promoted. And in that respect, also he says he also compares himself to other people. So that we have this reference here to the optimati, the aristocrats, the senatorial class, and the populares, the people who the advocates of the common people, essentially, right? And so that was the major dividing line, class line in the Roman Republic, and that was those divisions had to be harmonized. And so Cicero often compares himself to other Roman politicians. I'm not sure I can remember the names, but there was one fellow who says on the Republic, I am in favor of nothing that is popular. So whatever the common people want, I'm against it, right? And Cicero says, well, that's not quite right. I mean, the people do have interests and they do have opinions that are at least worth listening to, and that's why we give them tribunes, so that they can have a voice in the Constitution, so that even if they're wrong, they at least get to express their opinion. And so again, the one has this role of the statesman is to harmonize these different classes and try to pursue what is good for all of them.
Yeah, just to build on that, I totally agree. This is rich with, and it's I think what he's saying here, as Ethan pointed out, is consonant with things that Plato will talk about, also things that Aristotle will talk about in the Politics and other political writings, right? The idea of the just ruler, or the good leaders of a state or a city are going to be concerned with the interest of the whole. So what marks, for instance, for Aristotle, the difference between a monarchy and a tyranny, between an aristocracy and an oligarchy, between a polity and a democracy, is the question of whether or not the ruling element in the society, whichever it is, the one, the few, or the many, do they rule in the interest of the common interest, or just the interest of their own class or their own persons, right? And so I think that's consistent here. The idea of a management or a guardianship, is the picture of you're holding in trust, right? The responsibility to care for the whole community. It is really interesting that to the point Ethan was talking about, the sort of the optimates, or the best, the wealthy, the well-born, the best men versus the populares, right? Or those who might themselves be well-born, well-educated, etc., but nevertheless are claiming to speak on behalf of the lower class. Cicero would probably fall within the optimates, right? And the book, this book I read, Lawless Republic by the classicist Josiah Osgood, kind of argues that Cicero ultimately wasn't able to actually genuinely represent the plebeians, right? And so he's kind of a failure in terms of, now maybe it's a little harsh, he's trying to be a kind of person who thinks about this harmonious relationship, but it's kind of hard. And this is Madison. I mean, to kind of way fast forward to a Madisonian way of thinking about, hey, there's always going to be competing interests, between, you know, different groups in society? Is there a way to, is this even a possible thing to fully, you know, care for all of the different interests? Or by, you know, Madison's example in Federalist 10, I think, is, you know, if you favor the debtors, you're going to hurt the creditors, and if you favor the creditors, you're going to hurt the debtors, right? Is there a way to actually, you know, balance all of these interests in a way that is, uh, you know, acceptable to all? It's a tough thing. The last thing I'll point out is that one of the things I think is really interesting about Aristotle's analysis along these lines is connected to what Cicero is saying here, and I kind of call it the equilibrium theory of justice, right? It's that you have to, you know, in order for the city to be stable and to be enduring, it has to be just, right? It has to can care for the interest. It has to care and give to each what is his due to a tolerable degree. Or else there's going to be factionalism. There's going to be cycling between regimes, and each ruling element that comes to power is going to rule only in its own interests and oppress the other parts of the city. So very interesting, a challenging, a tall order again. But as we're saying, Cicero gives tall orders.
Yeah, absolutely. Only thing that I would add here, one, I was struck by the line, you know, by consulting the interests of some of the citizens and neglecting others. It sounds to me like just the kind of politics we've had of late in the current year, that we just take turns advancing one set of interests and neglecting the others, plainly falls short of our ambition for a healthy republic, of what we expect. And I think we've got some roots of that here. My other thought was that Cicero gives us here plainly a very moral vision of politics. The job of the ruler is to neglect his own interests, to set them aside, to rule in the interests of all, weighing the interests of all as much as they can be harmonized in the common good. But he's also identifying a theme, very much part of his life, but which we may habitually associate with the early modern political theorists like Hobbes and Machiavelli, that civil war is the worst thing. That's what we want to avoid. And yet, of course, Machiavelli comes to a radically different conclusion about the role, the duty of the ruler to be just and true and prudent and good. I was just thinking here that Cicero, he certainly, you know, knows civil war, and he's able to say the civil strife is the worst thing that can happen. We want to avoid that at all costs. And he would say it's your job as a statesman, doing your duty, right, fulfilling your duties, to prevent that by acting in just this way. So I'm sorry to bring up Machiavelli twice in one episode, but that it leaps out at me that he's not indifferent.
And he is at this time surrounded by other statesmen who are acting in very Machiavellian ways, who are fanning the flames of civil war to suit their own interests. So he's right in the middle of this, yes.
Okay, well, we've come through the end of Book 1, Chapter 86, and I think this is a good time for us to bring this episode to a close. I think we'll be back next week, next Wednesday, to pick up with chapters 87 through 92, which will bring an end to this treatment of greatness of spirit. I appreciate both my co-hosts here, Ethan and Ben. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. And thank you guys for watching. We hope you'll subscribe to this podcast, share it, popularize it, share it with your friends, let people know about it. You've been listening to the On Duties podcast from the Ciceronian Society. We'll see you next week. Goodbye. Welcome back to the On Duties podcast, a production of the Ciceronian Society. We are reading through every chapter of Cicero's great work, On Duties. We hope you'll join us either in this Cambridge edition or in some other edition. Look for links in the show notes, the description of this episode. We are publishing weekly every Wednesday throughout 2026 and perhaps into 2027 if the need arises, so we can cover the entire book. We are in video format on our YouTube channel and audio format on all other platforms. So please check us out, like, subscribe, and share this podcast if you like it. Let me introduce our hosts today. I am Chris Anadale. I teach philosophy at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland. I'm joined today by Ethan Alexander-Davey and Ben Peterson. Gentlemen, would you mind introducing yourselves briefly?
Yes, Ethan Alexander-Davey. I teach political science at Campbell University, and one of my courses on political theory includes some of the works of Cicero on the Republic and on the laws, and various other excerpts from his works.
Well, thanks, Chris. I'm Ben Peterson, and I teach political science at Abilene Christian University. And same story for me. I teach some political theory classes, and in my ancient political theory class, we cover the Republic and the laws. So I'm enjoying getting a different side of Cicero in On Duties.
Okay, thanks very much. Really appreciate you guys who are stalwarts in our society and at our conference for coming on with us today and in past weeks. We have read up through page 34 in this edition, the end of chapter 86 of book 1. We're coming to the end of Cicero's treatment of the virtue of greatness of spirit. And we're going to read here, I think, from section 87 through the end of section 92. Ben, would you like to begin reading? And Ethan, I'll give you first comment. I'm sorry, 87. Sorry, let's have you do 87 through 89, if you don't mind, Ben.
Okay, certainly. Electioneering and the struggle for positions of honor is an altogether wretched practice. Again, Plato's words on the subject are splendid. Those who compete between themselves over who should administer the republic act as if sailors were to fight over which of them should be principal helmsman. Similarly, he advises us that we should consider as enemies those who take up arms against us, not those who want to protect the republic in the way each judges best. It was in that way that Publius Africanus and Quintus Metellus used to disagree with one another without bitterness. Furthermore, we should not listen to those who think we should be deeply angry with our opponents and consider that that is what a great spirited and courageous man does. For nothing is more to be praised, nothing more worthy of a great and splendid man than to be easily appeased and forgiving. Among free peoples who possess equality before the law, we must cultivate an affable temper and what is called loftiness of spirit. Otherwise, if we are angry with those who approach us when it is inconvenient, or make overbold demands on us, we shall become unhelpfully and hatefully sour. We must, however, recommend gentleness and forgiveness on the understanding that we may exercise severity for the sake of the republic, for without that the city cannot be governed. Punishment and correction should never be insulting. It should be undertaken in accordance with what is useful to the republic, not to the one who administers the punishment or reprimand. We must be careful that the punishment should not be heavier than the offense, and that we do not have some beaten when others charged with the same offense are not even summoned. It is particularly when punishing that one should restrain one's anger. A man who is angry when he goes to punish will never maintain that intermediate course between too much and too little that the Peripatetics approve. They are in fact right to approve, if only they did not praise angriness, calling it a beneficial gift of nature. For surely anger should be denied on all occasions. Our prayer should be that those in charge of the republic be like the laws, which are led to punish not through anger, but through fairness.
Okay, yeah, so there's a lot in this set of passages here. Of course, we have again a reference to Plato and a swipe at electioneering. And now, of course, Cicero had to engage in electioneering as a senator. They were elected, and one had to develop a pretty solid patronage network to get elected. It is, I suppose, expected of the gentleman to view this as a dirty enterprise, to try to have to win favor in this way.
Yeah.
But of course, as a gentleman statesman, in which the top positions are elective, one does have to take into account public opinion, and also, again, in the Roman Republic, they are ruling over free men, not slaves, and so I think that's where that's part of where this discussion of anger comes in. One does not treat members of the Republic, citizens, as though they were nothing, as though they didn't have rights, right? They have equality before the law. As citizens, they have a certain deserve a certain respect and dignity, and that includes being treated equally by the laws. So the punishments should be seen as a correction for an injustice, and not as an occasion for a powerful person to vent his displeasure on those who have displeased him. So this is essential for the a preservation of justice, that punishments be seen not to be motivated by anger, but by the desire to correct what are actual violations of justice, violations of the law.
Right, very good. And I would add to that it's interesting to see this set of reflections on anger, which we might associate with great-spirited men who are inclined to seek glory and to practice to demonstrate their courage through battle and through conflict, may also be inclined to anger. And here Cicero recommends again the rational rule of anger, to act, to sacrifice maybe the demands of anger in your own case to the good of the republic, to the need to behave in such a way that the state is seen to as well as possible. But he goes on about it. He says quite a lot to say about anger, especially in punishment. He praises and builds up. It's most glorious and noble to be easily appeased, right? So we might think that the man who's conscious of his own greatness and nobility is the most deeply offended, and therefore needs to extract the most from those he punishes. And first Cicero says, no, first, that's not the way it is. You're even if you can walk away from it, it's even loftier. Is it not even more praiseworthy? But then for all the perhaps superstition about or gossip about Cicero being derivative, he's willing to just take on Aristotle in the Peripatetics quite directly. So they made a mistake by saying that anger is the kind of thing that can be done moderately. It's best to have no anger whatsoever in your system of punishment, to only punish out of a sense of fairness. So there's this rigorous equality before the law, but also anger, he says, has no place in judgment and in punishment. That's a kind of bold new territory to go into. So, Ben, any further thoughts on that?
On that score at the very end there, the connection with the rule of law, right? The statesman's trying to implement the rule of law. One of the idea of the rule of law is, the we are governed by the law, and the law represents kind of settled judgment, reason, not passion, not arbitrary will of whoever happens to be in charge, right? And so one of like someone like Thomas Hobbes' objections to the very notion of the rule of law is that at the end of the day, the interpretation of law, the enforcement of law, they're going to come down to the rule of men. Somebody's going to be doing those tasks. And so this is kind of actually an interesting potential solution, to say, okay, the person has to be kind of acting like the laws when they are enforcing the laws, right? They have to be passionless, or have their passions under control, especially their anger. So that's a really interesting piece there. One thing I think I remember Catherine Bradshaw, who was one of the co-hosts earlier in this series, saying that Julius Caesar was kind of known for exhibiting this forgiveness on occasion, right, to his political enemies. Once you kiss the ring and go through the once I've defeated you, right, then I can be magnanimous and be forgiving, right? That was just an interesting piece there. One more couple of quick points. I mean, yes, the electioneering thing is really interesting. And Aristotle actually considered elections to be an example of an oligarchic institution as opposed to a democratic institution, because it was tended to be reserved for, the people of a great name or something like that, or wealth, or who could do well in them. And I believe the American founders in their first few, presidential elections, first one or two at least, kind of tried to let other people do the electioneering for them, right? On this to cultivate this idea of, this is not something that we want to get into the habit of going out and giving stump speeches for ourselves, right? There's something unseemly about that. And then last point I'll make, this is a bit of a side note, but the note in our text says that his allusion to Plato here, Plato's Republic, and the example of the sailors jostling and competing with each other. Cicero's making a great point, which is kind of akin to a loyal opposition idea. It's that, hey, don't treat as fellow members of your polity, maybe people who are competing against you in an election or something like that, or who are taking their turn at being the consul and ruling differently than you would, don't treat them as enemies, argue against them, but be civil. That's a great point. But our text notes that that's not really the point Plato's making in
Yeah.
the Republic, right? If I recall, I looked at it briefly this morning, and I think he's trying to say something. He's given the example of why philosophers kind of have a hard time convincing people that they're actually able to rule well, because the people in his sort of example of the ship, it's an example where people don't know how to run a ship, and they all end up just competing. The sailors all end up fighting each other and competing each other for the top slot. And the person who actually has spent time studying how to run a ship, and all the naval, all the air and the sea conditions you have to know, he sounds like he's talking nonsense to them because he's not very good at jostling his way to the top, right? And so anyway, there's something else going on with Plato, but nevertheless, it's a good point Cicero is making. It just may not be the point Plato was making.
Yeah, I think that's right. So Cicero is making some room for competitive politics, and we should listen to opposition. We should listen to people who have other opinions about what the best course of action is, and not see them as if they were taking up arms against us. Whereas for Plato, the analogy of the ship is Plato's way of saying democracy just doesn't work, right? It's not the people don't have any idea what they're doing, and you need to leave the decision making to the experts.
Right, exactly. Ethan, I'd like you to read the next part. I think we'll do chapters 90 and 91, if you don't mind. I'll do the first comment, and then we'll finish with chapter 92.
So 90 and 91.
Yes, please.
Okay. When things are going well, and as we would wish, we should make a great effort to avoid haughtiness, scorn, and arrogance. Unreliability is revealed as much in reacting excessively to success as to adversity. It is a splendid achievement to face all of life with equanimity, never altering the expression of one's face, as we hear that Socrates and Gaius Lelius did. Philip, king of Macedon, may have been surpassed in deeds and glory by his son, but I note that he was both more affable and more humane. Philip, therefore, was always a great man, while Alexander often acted most dishonorably. They seem to give us good advice, then, who warn that the more we excel, the more humbly we should behave. According to Panetius, his pupil and friend Africanus used to say that when frequent skirmishing has made horses fierce and high-spirited, men are accustomed to give them to trainers so that they may have gentle mounts to ride. Similarly, men whom success has made unbridled and overconfident should be led into the training ring of reason and learning, so that they perceive the frailty of human affairs and the variability of fortune. Even in times of extreme good fortune, we very much need to make use of our friends' counsel, and it is then, more than previously, that we should attribute to them authority. At this time, too, we must beware of giving ear to flatterers, or of allowing ourselves to be fawned upon. It is easy to be fooled in this, for we think that we are the kind of people who ought to be praised. Consequently, countless blunders arise when such opinions so inflate men that they become the objects of dishonorable mockery and fall into serious errors. So much for that subject.
Thank you very much, Ethan. Yeah, this is a shorter set of chapters, but one in which we hear an argument for humility, which we normally associate with not a Roman, but a Christian virtue. Humility here, though, advised as part of the office of the great, right? If you really are a great-spirited man who wants to do great things, to be seen to do great things, to be admired and praised long after your death for the great things that you've done, you ought to, in service of your doing greatness, be humble. And the reason here being that you can fall into the trap of being, he praises Philip, of course, for being more affable and humane and therefore superior in greatness to his son, who excelled him in conquest. The more we excel, the more humbly we should behave. It's the great metaphor of the horses, right? When a horse is high-spirited, it's very good, but give it to the trainers, let them break it in for you so that you can ride it sort of to glory yourself. You should be like the horse, right? Too high-spirited, too much, thinking too much of itself is going to sort of overshoot the mark, maybe an Aristotelian idea here at play. And then chapter 91, a short chapter about we need to adhere to the advice of our friends, even more so when we are doing well. It might be the time when you would think you would least need the advice of friends because things are going well. You've actually succeeded. You're achieving on your own merits. That's just when you most need to take the good counsel of your friends and to avoid flattery. And as he says, this is maybe one of the hazards at the very top level of performance, is that because you know yourself and think yourself correctly to be someone who deserves praise, you're not able to discern well-motivated praise from your friends from the flattering and fawning praise of your false friends. So, Ben, would you like to take first?
Sure. There's some, but I can't remember these exactly, but I'm thinking of a quotation from some politician or writer that is about how every political career ends in failure. This is an interesting point that, hey, just when you have succeeded or when things seem to be going really well, there's a special danger, right, that the leader of state has to be careful about, or even just the person who's trying to be, do his duty and be a good man. It's just seems like a sort of wise thing. It's also interesting that, with Stoicism, I tend to think, he's talking here about an equanimity of spirit that kind of goes along with this Stoic attitude that he's sometimes channeling here. We tend to think of when bad things happen, you can kind of be solid and you can kind of weather the storm, and you can sort of develop an integrity that allows you to persevere. But it's interesting here that he says you have to maintain that even when times seem to be good, and you're going to tend to kind of run away with yourself a little bit and get too puffed up and accept what is actually flattery, and all these things, right? And so it's just a very interesting admonition here and it's even interesting. It struck me that he specifically says, watch how the expression of your face, make sure your face is not, you're maintaining kind of a calm, cool, collected demeanor. You don't want to be too, kind of exuberant or joyful. It's just play it cool. And it's interesting that it is funny that he talks about Alexander, right? Alexander does seem to be a kind of up and down kind of person, right? And so it's an interesting point. And then, so I just do think it's just an interesting thing to think about. Yeah, how do you handle success? And that can be just as challenging as handling a challenge or failure.
Yeah, a few things here that come to mind. First of all, again, the recommendation which he's made again here, that one appear affable and humane and not show anger, and essentially don't show emotion, don't show that you have been buffeted by whatever just happened, which is the opposite of what I think the recommendation is for politicians today. They're supposed to show emotion. They're supposed to show that they're just like us, right? And they react in the same way to things that we do. Whereas the way the gentleman maintains authority is by not showing that emotion, by showing that he is, in a sense, above it all, and he can handle it. He can handle things that the rest of us cannot. So that's one thing that occurs to me. And then also, there's perhaps some irony here, right? So the great man does not have to trumpet his achievements. He should let the achievements speak for themselves and not promote himself. That's a bit ironic when we think about Cicero himself, who is known for his self-promotion, especially in his oratory. So that's maybe a little bit ironic. But I think maybe the main point here, and both of you have said this is about self-control. The great man needs to not become haughty so that he doesn't lose control of himself, right? Even if he has been successful, he should remain humble and not assume that success will continue, and not listen only to flatterers who tell him what he wants to hear, just because he has been successful so far. So humility seems like a matter of prudence. This is how the great man stays on track, by not assuming that his success so far is going to continue, and so that he has to be willing to listen to critical advice as well as praise.
Right. And I'd say it's interesting. It's an interesting approach to humility that you must be humble so that you can continue to be great. Right. If you fail to be properly humble, you will lose your greatness and you don't want that. But that's still the sort of primary object of your striving, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I think we're left here with section 92, and I think is it my turn to read
I think
I think
so.
so.
now? So I'm trying to remember here. And I've now lost track of whose turn it is to comment. Is I think Ben first comment.
I
Let's
think
go.
so.
All right. Our judgment should be that the achievements which are greatest and show the greatest spirit are those of the men who rule the republic. For their government reaches extremely widely and affects the greatest number. Many men of great spirit, however, have lived and still live lives of leisure. Some, limiting themselves to their own business, investigate and examine great matters of some kind. Others have taken a middle course between philosophy and the administration of the republic. Enjoying their own personal wealth, they neither increase this by every possible method, nor prevent those close to them from making use of it, sharing it rather with friends and the republic too, if the need arise. Their wealth should in the first place be well won, and not dishonorably or invidiously acquired. Secondly, it should be increased by reason, industriousness, thrift. Thirdly, it should be available for the benefit of as many as possible, provided they are worthy of it, and be at the command not of lust and luxury, but of liberality and beneficence. A man who observes these rules may live not only in a grand, impressive, and spirited manner, but also with simplicity and trustworthiness, a true friend of other men.
Well, one thing that strikes me here is that while he does have a clear preference for the those of the greatest spirit and achievement who are ruling the republic and putting into practice all the things he's been talking about, he kind of allows for some flexibility in terms of what a good life that is still fulfilling duties looks like, right? It could be a life of relative leisure and calm that's not out there, leading the republic, but nevertheless, it's the wealth of this person is available to serve others, to serve his friends, for the benefit of others, and it's not too much luxury. It's not too little, right? To be able to have things to share with others. It's this mean picture he's talking about. So and also the ending here with friendship. I mean, and at one point he did talk about as one of the most worthy kinds of connections and loyalties we might have is to our friends who are similarly seeking to be good, right, and seeking to follow in the path of duty. And so it's a nice ending there.
Right, and it's a return to a theme that he's discussed before, the problem of the statesman who has been driven out of politics, right? He is not able to participate, he is not able to practice his craft to the full extent, but he can still manage his wealth properly and use it to the extent that he is able for the benefit of the republic and for the benefit of friends. And that is still using wealth properly for the to serve others as a statesman. Right? That's what a statesman is to do, is to serve others. And so even if he cannot administer the government at a certain time, he still has other roles that he can perform that are consistent with that greatness of spirit that he's been defending.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting to think of the biographical connection here. I thought we might think of this chapter as presenting us with three characters: the true statesman, right, the one who has the greatest spirit and the most glorious achievement, and that's the men who rule the republic. Kind of at the other end of the scale, the men of leisure, and I think he associates leisure here with philosophy. This is the Platonic philosophical life. When he says men, they investigate some matter or another, he's thinking, I think, of intellectual practices, of sort of the philosophical contemplation aloof from the world. And I notice he calls them men of great spirit, but he doesn't praise them. right? In the sense, this seems like somebody who set the slider all the way to 0 in terms of his public concern, not really fulfilling the duties of a statesman. But one can be, take this middle path, right, and be both a scholar and a statesman, a philosopher, a man of leisure and some wealth, provided he gives the rules, right? Wealth has to be honorably won, can't be, rapaciously taken. It has to be put at the service of the state when necessity requires, and it should benefit many people. Well, here's a way that you can be great while you still, we might say, are not perhaps fully committed to, or perhaps, as you said, Ethan, are arbitrarily excluded from actual rule. This is the sort of the portrait of the philosopher statesman who is able to get right what Plato got wrong with his portrait of the aloof philosopher king.
And there's also, as you mentioned, there's another topic that he's going to return to. There are right and wrong ways to acquire wealth, and he's going to have more to say about that, especially for a statesman. He's going to have more to say about that later on.
Ben, any final thoughts?
Well, maybe y'all could help me out. Just this last phrase here, or this last sentence: a man who observes these rules may live not only in a grand, impressive, and spirited manner, but also with simplicity and trustworthiness. So as he's saying, I sort of read that to be referring to that third path that sort of middle path he was talking about, that combines, this, the acquiring of some wealth to be able to share with friends and the Republic, but also it is also in a sense a life of simplicity and trustworthiness. Or are you saying he's got two different? Is that, the philosopher has the simple, trustworthy life, who is, that is simple and is not seeking to acquire wealth? Are those? I guess I'm asking, do y'all think those are two different paths he's describing in that last sentence, or are those that third path?
I think he's referring to that third path there.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
I
kind of how I
concur.
read it, but
Yeah, I think keep in mind that he's writing this to his son, who is, I think, if I read the beginning of the book correctly, he's worried that his son studying philosophy in Athens might be too much inclined to the abstract philosophical pursuits and neglect the sort of the great spiritedness, the glory of politics as an arena for the great spirited man. And so he's recommending, well, look, if you want to be simple and trustworthy, the sort of virtues of the philosopher who knows and speaks only the truth, you don't have to retreat from the world to do that. You can, provided that you have a certain kind of attitude towards your wealth, that you use it in a certain way, you can be one of this third type of man. So that seems to me to be what he's praising, maybe especially for the benefit of his son, young Marcus, right? That you can have it all. You can have both.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Be rich and humble, simple.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of chapter 92 of book 1 of Cicero's On Duties, and the end of this treatment of greatness of spirit. The next major topic for the remainder of book 1 is going to be this fourth virtue of seemliness or decorum. Looking forward to talking about that with you gentlemen and with some other co-hosts in the weeks ahead. I want to thank my co-hosts today, Ethan Alexander-Davey and Ben Peterson. You've been listening to the On Duties podcast, a production of the Ciceronian Society. We hope you'll tune in next Wednesday for another episode. Thank you. Goodbye.